resolution in the House, come back, and let's get the work of the United States Senate, the United States government really going again. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Wyoming.
I want to thank the chairman of the Appropriations Committee for her comments and all of the effort that she's had and the bipartisan cooperation that there's been to get bills to the floor. But we're in kind of a pickle right now. We're talking about a continuing resolution. A continuing resolution means we didn't get our work done. If we had the appropriations bills passed through this body, we wouldn't need a continuing resolution. Every agency would understand what it could spend for the whole next year. Instead, we're quibbling over how long a continuing resolution we ought to have and what ought to be in it. We haven't done an appropriation, total appropriation, by the October 1st deadline for I'm not even sure how many years. That would be the answer to what we're going through right now. If we got to debate each of those bills in a timely fashion with an open amendment process. I appreciate that there's been an open amendment process in the committee. I'm always disturbed that we haven't had much of an open amendment process around here on the floor. Every time that a bill comes to the floor, almost every time that a bill comes to the floor, there are negotiations about how many amendments each side can have. And I've seen those negotiations go on for 2 weeks. You know how many amendments we could vote on in 2 weeks? I think we could probably vote on 50, maybe 100 in 2 weeks. Instead, we don't vote on amendments, which gives everyone the impression, of course, that there isn't an open amendment process. And the longer that the stopper's kept in the bottle, the more anger that there is around here. And I'd say there's anger on both sides, because both sides have amendments that they'd like to bring up. We've got to quit deal-making and start legislating around here. That's the way this process was designed. They had legislation in the committee, but we need to have the ability to legislate on the floor, not allocating something to a few people on both sides of the aisle and both ends of the building to come back with some kind of a proposal by some kind of a fiscal fall-off date. And that fiscal fall-off date, of course, happens to be in statute, that the year begins October 1st. That was yesterday. That's when every agency is supposed to know exactly how much they can spend. How's that been affecting us? Well, there was a sequester. Interesting part on the sequester is it was 2 3/10% of the amount of money that an agency, program, department were to get. Now, what did it actually turn out to be? It turned out to be 5 3/10%. Why did it turn out to be 5 3/10%? Well, we were already 8/12 of the way through the year before they found out that there was going to be a sequester, that they found out for sure that there was going to be a limitation on their spending. Now, if they've already spent 1/12 of what they spent the year before each month during that 8-month period, and then find out that for the whole year's worth of revenue that they got, 8/12 of which they've already spent, they have to take a 2 3/10% cut. That makes it a 5 3/10% cut. That makes it much more difficult. Actually, CBO scored my penny plan. That's where we just do a 1% reduction in every dollar that the United States government spends with flexibility. And if we add that to the sequester, which would bring it to 3 3/10%, they say that the budget would balance in 2 years. 2 years we could balance the budget. Hasn't happened for over a decade. Only happened 4 times, I think, in the last 50 years. But we could do it. And I'm pretty sure the people would say if we had our appropriations done timely so that the agencies knew what they were doing on October 1st and then had a sequester plus 1%, I think they could live with it. And I think they could make effective cuts if they wanted to. One of our problems around here is that government doesn't usually like to make effective cuts. Government likes to make it hurt. When it hurts, people come back and are really upset at what's been taken away from them. But we have a lot of redundancy in government. We have a lot of waste. We have a lot of programs that are happening in a whole bunch of different agencies, none of which are effective, but we're still doing it everywhere. We could get rid of all of that duplication, or at least half of it. Half of it's all that could be totally effective and give them a little bit of a bonus for doing it. But we're now at a point where we're going to make it hurt. I mean, there were World War II veterans in town yesterday. They were flown in here so they could see their memorial to the tremendous efforts that they did. And what did they find? They found barricades. I've been to the World War II memorial a lot of times. There haven't been any barricades there. I also didn't see another person there if I was late enough at night. So what was the purpose of the barricades? Well, we had the national parks. That's a national park, and the national parks got shut down. And here's the extreme that this is being carried to. Over in Teton National Park, they even have barricades at the turnouts. Now, turnouts can be used to fix a flat tire. Turnouts can be used to get a rest if you're tired of driving. Of course, turnouts can also be used to take pictures of gorgeous scenery, like the Tetons. And that's what the turnouts are primarily designed for. But how much does it cost us if somebody pulls off and takes a picture of mountains? How much could that cost us? How much does it save us by putting up barricades so that they can't pull off the road? How much did it cost us to put barricades out there so that they can't pull off the road and take pictures of the Tetons? Throughout government, we're trying to make it hurt. We're trying to emphasize to people that we did so poorly that they need to suffer. And if they suffer enough, they'll get a hold of us and make us reverse what we've done. Well, we should have been busy last April working on appropriations and working through that process. The President's about to leave on a trip. I'm not planning on leaving until everything's been cleared up here, and I would suggest that he not do that either. I got an interesting letter from one of my constituents that says, how does the private sector see the federal government? Well, the private sector sees the federal government as a wagon being pulled by the private sector. And the wagon filled with people that work for the federal government. And there aren't enough people pulling the wagon and too many people riding in the wagon. He makes quite a point. Now, he does admit that the people riding in the wagon pay taxes too. But he also points out that those taxes came from the private sector to pay the wages from which the taxes are taken. So, yes, there are people riding in the wagon, even though they're working as well. But he's pointing out how the private sector has this extra load. And now they're getting a little bit more of a load. But he makes the point that we need more people in the private sector, and said that maybe the private sector ought to shut down. What would happen if the private sector shut down? What happened if trucks didn't haul any more goods across this country? What happens if the filling stations don't open? What happens with the myriad of things, groceries, the things that we count on every day that come from the private sector? And he just wanted me to know that he's tired of pulling the wagon with so many people in the wagon. And we have a chance to reduce the load in the wagon, and we ought to take advantage of that. But we're not. And we need to take advantage of that in a timely manner, and we need to get this wrapped up and get the government underway so that people aren't suffering in the make-it-hurt atmosphere that we've got right now. There's another way to do it. There's a better way to do it. We should have done it. We should have been doing it much earlier. I yield the floor.
The Majority Leader.
I have really great affection for my friend from Wyoming. He's a fine man. I've enjoyed working with him. And I'm not going to nitpick what he said, but I am going to direct my attention to one thing he said. Why didn't we do our appropriation bills? Mr. President, please. I wouldn't expect that coming from him. We've tried. We're filibustered. We tried one here. Remember transportation appropriations? We got one Republican vote, Susan Collins. They killed that. So don't come and lecture us on why didn't we do the bills last April. Mr. President, I've often said that I sympathize with John Boehner, and I do. He has a very difficult job. Even when the Speaker would prefer to be reasonable, when he would prefer to be the Speaker of the House of Representatives, the whole House, Democrats and Republicans, because that's what he is, instead of just Speaker of the Republicans of the House of Representatives, and sometimes appearing to be the Speaker for a minority within his majority. He seems to be kowtowing to everything that they ask. This is the Tea Party. These voices in his caucus push him further and further to the right and over the cliff. It can be difficult to balance the responsibilities of remaining true to one's party's core beliefs and doing the right thing for the government as a whole. I'd like to give a personal example. I try not to do that often, but I'll give one today. The presiding officer wasn't here during the Iraq War. I didn't just oppose it. I thought it was such a bad thing for our country. And one reason that, I'll give you some reasons why I really didn't like it at all. I hate it as much as I'm sure John Boehner dislikes the Affordable Care Act. But even though I voted for the 2002 authorization to confront Saddam Hussein, I quickly was appalled at how that authority was used, and the information that got me to vote for it was absolutely false. There was no clear objectives, not a coherent strategy. No one even knew in the administration the difference between Shias and Sunnis. There was no international support for that. I spent many, for lack of a better description, gut-wrenching nights and some days trying to figure out what I should do. I was disgusted, mad. President Bush and Republicans in Congress that not one more American would be killed or maimed. I was so angry that I said things I wish I hadn't. They're in the history books. They're there. Some of my friends on the other side of the aisle, especially John McCain, as he can do, told me how wrong I was in opposing the war. I thought I would be willing to do anything to stop that war. But I faced a choice in 2007. The Commander-in-Chief, President George Bush, had requested $93 billion for additional government funding to continue the war. Without that, no more war. Congress sent President Bush a supplemental appropriations bill that ended his blank check in Iraq. He vetoed that bill. At this point, I could have taken the very same steps that Speaker Boehner has taken this week. I could have blocked funding for the federal government in order to block funding for that war. I faced immense pressure from the left. Move on. Oh, I got thousands and thousands and thousands of emails and letters from that organization, from my own base, to do just that. It was a very difficult choice for me. I could put my own opposition to that senseless war and my fellow Democrats' opposition to the war before everything else. But as the leader of the Senate, I had an obligation to ensure the smooth operation of federal government. I couldn't do both, Mr. President. I tried to figure out a way to do both. I couldn't figure a way out because there was no way. Couldn't do both. It's a decision that I took extremely seriously, as I know anyone else would. At the end, I actually defied the strident voices on the left, urging me to stay true to my personal belief that the war in Iraq was an unjust war, and I should end that war at any cost. But, Mr. President, I felt that I had other responsibilities. One was to make sure that our government was funded, that we didn't lose face in front of the international community and resort to that kind of extremist legislative tactics. So we funded the government. We funded the war that I didn't like. My choice made a lot of Democrats very unhappy. It made people on my own staff upset with me, their boss. But looking back on that decision, I came to the right decision in my own mind. So today, Mr. President, the country finds itself perhaps in a similar situation. Republicans in Congress, for reasons we've discussed here on the floor, are obsessed with Obamacare. They don't like it. I have no reason to doubt their sincerity. I doubt their logic, but I have no doubt, I don't doubt their sincerity when they say they believe the Affordable Care Act is damaging our country. They're wrong. They're wrong now, and time will show how really wrong they are. Because millions of Americans right now, today, are already benefiting from this law. And millions more will benefit in the years to come. So when these history books are written that people will read, Obamacare will be seen as one of the greatest single steps to help America. It's in the same league as Social Security and Medicare, and it will provide quality, affordable health care for America, all Americans. I understand why my Republican colleagues disagree with what I've just said. Unfortunately, though, when Speaker Boehner was faced with the same choice I was faced with in 2007, he's made a very different decision. He put his own opposition to Obamacare and his fellow Republicans' opposition to Obamacare above all else, even above ensuring the strength of our economy and the smooth operation of this government we love. History will prove that to be short-sighted and wrong. But regardless of right or wrong, our responsibility as leaders is to find a path forward to reopen the government and protect our economy. So earlier today, 11:15 or thereabouts, no, it was 11:45 this morning, I offered John Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives, a reasonable compromise that respects both of our priorities. Before the House is a Senate-passed legislative tool to reopen government. The measure funds the government at the level chosen by not us, but the House leaders, a level much lower than I would have chosen, or Senator Murray would have chosen, or Chairman of our Appropriations Committee, Mikulski, would have chosen. I propose that the Speaker allow this joint resolution to come for a vote before the full House of Representatives. Every Democrat will vote for that over there. And according to news reports, more than 100 House Republicans are prepared to vote for it as well. So in short, what it says is reopen the government. Then I, on behalf of the Democratic caucus, commit to name conferees to a budget conference, as the Speaker has requested. This conference can engage on the important fiscal issues facing our nation. Speakers often cited these fiscal issues as the most important challenge of our generation. Conference would be an appropriate place to have these discussions. In a letter that I wrote to the Speaker, we didn't limit what we would talk about in the conference. In fact, I will read parts of this letter. Now we find ourselves at loggerheads, I say in the letter to John Boehner. There needs to be a path forward to reopen our government and protect our economy. This is a communication to you offering a sensible, reasonable compromise. Before the House, you have a Senate-passed measure to reopen the government, funded at the level the House chose in its legislation. I propose that you allow this joint resolution to pass, reopening government. And I commit to name conferees to a budget conference as soon as the government reopens. That conference can discuss the important issues facing our nation. You and your colleagues have repeatedly cited these fiscal issues as the things on which we need to work. This conference would be an appropriate place to have these discussions where participants could raise whatever proposals, tax reform, health care, agriculture, and certainly discretionary spending like veterans, national parks, NIH, they felt appropriate. So, Mr. President, that's pretty direct and to the point. These conferees could do whatever they wanted without the threat of government shutdown and ensuing economic collapse hanging over their heads. Together, we could end this government shutdown and work to address the important issues facing our nation. Together, we can work to put our nation on sound fiscal footing by engaging in a responsible, long-term budget process, not 5 weeks like the CR that's now before us. And this morning on the Senate floor, I warned of the effects of the Republican government shutdown that have already come. My colleagues have done this all day. About what has this done to federal employees generally? What has it done to NIH? What has it done to transportation? What has it done to the Centers for Disease Control? And on with all these programs that are now stunningly stopped. There are many unintended consequences of this irresponsible and short-sighted shutdown. It's reckless and irresponsible. But Speaker Boehner can end this Republican government shutdown today. We've given him what he wants. They sent over from the House, let's go to conference. We're saying we'll go to conference on anything you want to go to conference on. Defy the strident voices on the right, urging you to put your personal beliefs and the beliefs of your caucus before the strength of our economy and the needs of our country. I ask that the letter to which I referred be made part of the record.
Without objection. Senator from Washington.
Mr. President, Democrats and Republicans have some serious differences when it comes to our policies and our values and our priorities. But one thing that we should be able to agree on, the bare minimum expected of us here in Congress, is that we shouldn't actively allow our constituents to be heard. That is why Senate Democrats will be here today with a clear message to the Republicans. Open the government up, end the shutdown. Allow the government to open and make sure our families and communities that we represent don't have to pay the price for the disagreements that we have. And then come back to the table and work with us on a long-term budget deal to avoid these constant crises. Majority Leader Reid has made it very clear to Speaker Boehner that he is willing to sit down and talk, and I truly hope that House Republicans take him up on that. Mr. President, on Monday night, as the government was shutting down, Speaker Boehner and the House Republicans lurched even deeper into the theater of the absurd. I was shocked. I couldn't believe my ears when I heard, with minutes to go before the shutdown began, Speaker Boehner was asking us for a conference on the spending bill. I thought, is he serious? Is this some kind of joke? Even by the standards of a party that shut down the government to stop health care reform law that was going to come online yesterday, no matter what they did, that was bizarre. But, Mr. President, I say to Speaker Boehner today, yes, let's start a budget conference. It's a bit late. I've been fighting to start one for 6 months, but better late than never. Let's sit down, let's negotiate, and let's work toward the balanced and bipartisan long-term budget deal that our constituents are expecting. A real budget conference, not like the photo op that we saw in the House of Representatives yesterday. A budget conference where the two sides can sit at the table, offer compromises, and work towards a balanced and bipartisan long-term budget deal the American people expect. But there's one condition, and it is a reasonable one, and it couldn't be more important. Speaker Boehner and the House Republicans should stop allowing our families and our communities to be hurt while we negotiate. They should pass our short-term bill, reopen the government, and then join us at the table for a budget conference where we can work together towards a common long-term deal. This is really common sense. It is the responsible thing to do. There is absolutely no reason why we shouldn't let the government open back up right now while all of us get in a room and work on a deal. Mr. President, given that Republicans spent the day yesterday talking about their newfound interest in a conference, I think it could be helpful to go back just a bit to remind people who are following us here today how we got to this point. For years, Republicans in the Senate and in the House have said it was critical that the Senate pass a budget. They came here to the floor. They blasted out press releases. They made it part of every one of their campaigns across the country. And at the beginning of this year, it seemed Democrats and Republicans agreed on at least one thing. The budget debate should proceed through regular order. The House was going to pass their budget, the Senate was going to pass ours, and then we were going to get together in a conference room and work out our differences. Senator McConnell said back then that once the Senate and House passed budgets, quote, the work of conferencing must begin. Republicans said in a conference was the, quote, best vehicle for the budget debate, quote, because we're doing it in plain sight. Well, Mr. President, I absolutely agreed. The Senate Budget Committee wrote our strong, pro-growth, pro-middle-class, long-term budget. Now, Mr. President, I'm sure that the hours that we spent debating this budget are not forgotten by anybody on this floor. We spent a week here in an open process, debating and voting on amendment after amendment until the very wee hours of the morning. And on March 23rd, the Senate passed our budget. We all remember that. And the House, by the way, passed theirs earlier that day. Now, I thought the next step would be we'd go to a conference as quickly as possible. I went to the House Budget Committee Chairman Ryan, and I told him the American people were expecting all of us to get in a room and work it out. I thought it was a no-brainer. We had significant differences between our two budgets, but I was ready to go and work with my colleagues and make compromises and get to work. And with 6 months to go before the end of the fiscal year, we had plenty of time. But, Mr. President, I was absolutely floored when I heard the House Republicans had changed their mind. They no longer wanted to go to conference. They no longer wanted to follow regular order. Now, Mr. President, I'm sure the idea of debating their budget and having it compared in an open and public forum was pretty unpleasant to them. They know how unpopular their plans were to end Medicare, as we know it, and to cut taxes for the rich. But they put it in their budget, and now it was their job to negotiate with us. So, Mr. President, I came here to the Senate floor and I asked for consent to go to a budget conference. I was joined by Senator Reid and many others. We asked to begin bipartisan negotiations, but Senate Republicans said no. We tried again and again and again. On April 23rd, we were blocked, April 23rd, blocked by Senator Toomey. On May 6th, Senator Cruz stood up and objected. On May 7th, May 8th, May 9th, May 14th, and May 15th, Senator McConnell said no. On May 16th, Senator Lee said no. May 21st, Senator Paul blocked our negotiations. May 22nd, it was Senator Rubio. May 23rd, Senator Lee. June 4th, Senator Rubio. June 12th, Senator Lee. June 19th, Senator Toomey. June 26th, Senator Cruz. July 11th, Senator Rubio. July 17th, Senator Lee. And on August 1st, Senator Rubio blocked us from starting a conference right before the August recess. Mr. President, we've come here 18 times. And every single time we tried to get in that room, every time we tried to start a conference and negotiate, Republicans stood up and they blocked us. And by the way, it wasn't just Democrats either. Quite a few of our Senate Republicans joined us in pushing for a conference. My colleague, Senator McCain, joined Democrats on the floor and said blocking a conference was, quote, incomprehensible and, quote, insane. Senator Corker said that to, quote, keep from appointing conferees is not consistent. Senator Flake said he, quote, would like to see a conference. Mr. President, Republicans offered one excuse after another, and by the way, none of them added up. First, they said they wanted a pre-conference framework, even though that is exactly what a budget is and was exactly what we were negotiating over. Then they said they wouldn't allow us to go to conference unless we guaranteed in our budget that the wealthiest Americans and biggest corporations would be protected from paying a penny more in taxes. Then they said they didn't want a bipartisan conference to take away the leverage that they would have during a debt ceiling debate. And then they called for a do-over of the budget debate, including another 50 hours of debate here on the floor and a whole new round of unlimited amendments, even after, Mr. President, I will remind all of us, many of them praised the open floor debates that we'd had during the Senate budget debate. So, Mr. President, their story about objecting just kept changing. Senator McCain said Republican preconditions and excuses were absolutely out of line and unprecedented. Senator Collins said that even though there's a lot we don't see eye to eye on, we should at least go to conference and make our best effort to get a deal. The stalling from some Republicans was, to quote Senators McCain and Collins, a little bizarre and ironic to say the least. Now, Republicans kept making excuses for stalling. But the bottom line was that after spending years saying the most important thing was for the Senate to pass a budget, once we did, they ran away as quick as they could. Now, Mr. President, I told Republicans again and again, right here on the Senate floor, and when I talked to them in private, if you don't join us in a conference and give us the time we need to work out a deal, you're going to be pushing us into a completely avoidable crisis. They didn't listen. They didn't want a conference. They didn't want to negotiate. They thought they'd have more leverage in a crisis, and they were doing everything they could to push us to this one. Well, they were right. They pushed us to this crisis. And now families across our country are paying the price. So, Mr. President, if Speaker Boehner truly wants to negotiate and end this lurching from crisis to crisis, he would let the House vote to keep the government open. It would pass, by the way, with a strong bipartisan vote. And then he would join us at the table in conference that I've been trying to start for months. So, Mr. President, I'm going to request consent for the 19th time to start a budget conference. And to be very clear, this is not a replacement for an immediate end to this shutdown. It would build on a short-term bill to end this crisis. It's not to negotiate a short-term deal while our families and our communities are being hurt by a shutdown. It is just to make clear the door is open for long-term negotiations that can start as soon as the threat of the shutdown is taken off the table. Mr. President, I am really hopeful that our Republican colleagues on the other side of this aisle who have watched with us our constituents look in amazement at the United States Senate and Congress as if we were unable to do the job that we have been asked to do, which is to govern this country in a responsible way. I would hope that they would take a moment to pause and to say, it's time to stand up, it's time to be leaders, it's time to stop holding our country and our communities hostage, it's time to stop putting fear into the lives of so many people. It's time to say, yes, we're going to open the government. We're not going to hold this country hostage. We're going to do our job. Mr. President, that is simply what we are asking to do today. Allow the Senate bill to come up for a vote in the House. It will pass. We know we have the votes, Republicans and Democrats together, who want to stop this crisis. And then we will sit down and do what we have been asked to do by the Republicans for a number of years now, to write a budget, to have the House write a budget, and to sit down and work out our differences. I see Senator Durbin here on the floor. Senator Durbin worked on the commission, Simpson-Bowles Commission, many years ago to try and resolve our differences. I think he would agree with me. It's time to get this done. I see Senator Warner on the floor right now, who has spent a great deal of time working to get us to a point where we can solve this crisis and have a way to move forward and a path that our country can rely on. I think, Mr. President, that many of our colleagues are ready to get past this crisis, are ready to open the government and begin the responsible thing of working the way we're supposed to. So I hope that they listen to Senator Reid and what he offered them today. I hope they consider it. I hope they do the right thing so families across our country don't have to continue bearing the burden of the Republican Party's dysfunction and division. So with that, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate receives a message from the House that they have passed H.J. Res. 59, as amended by the Senate then proceed to the consideration of calendar number 33, H.Con. Res. 25, that the amendment at the desk, which is the text of S.Con. Res. 8, the budget resolution passed by the Senate, be inserted in lieu thereof, that H.Con. Res. 25 as amended be agreed to, the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, that the Senate proceed to a vote on a motion to insist on its amendment, request a conference with the House on the disagreeing votes of the two houses, and authorize the chair to appoint conferees on part of the Senate, with all of the above occurring with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
I'm going to just in a second suggest the absence of quorum. I want to make sure that there's adequate time to give this due consideration. We tried not to rush into this, and I don't want to rush out of it. So we're going to go into a quorum call, giving the Republicans an opportunity to look and study this consent agreement. We've done what we thought the Speaker would want, what the Republican leader would want. We've said we'll discuss whatever you want to talk about in this conference, and I hope that this is something they will accept. But I note the absence of quorum.
I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Alexander. We see Senate leaders gathered there on the Senate floor, the lower left corner of the screen, including Senator Patty Murray. She is the chairman of the Budget Committee in the Senate, and she just offered on the Senate floor to go to conference with Republicans on the overall budget, not the temporary spending bill that they've been debating over the last couple days. And this is all happening before a meeting with President Obama later today. Mitch McConnell, including the Republican leader, the Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, who we see there, also House Speaker John Boehner and Democratic Leader Nancy Pelosi are expected at the White House at 5:30 Eastern Time this afternoon. A spokesman at the White House said that President Obama intends to discuss both the debt limit and the government shutdown. That's happening at 5:30 this afternoon.
Majority Leader.
Unanimous consent, the quorum call be terminated.
Without objection. Is there objection to the Senator from Washington's request? Is there objection to the Senator from Washington's request?
Mr. President?
The Senator from Pennsylvania.
Yeah, reserving the right to object, Mr. President, I would point out a couple of things that I didn't hear in the discussion from the Senator from Washington. One is the fact that the House has passed 3 different measures to fund the government. That's already happened. It's been sent over here, and each one was rejected by the Senate Democrats, one after another, so that we're now in a government shutdown. I'd also point out that after the Senate Democrats rejected every measure that the Republicans have sent over to fund the government, the Republican House sent over a measure to go to conference so that we could resolve this problem. So I find it a little bit ironic, to say the least, that we have our Democratic colleagues are saying we need to go to conference on the budget resolution. Now, I know the terminology here can get confusing for people, but that is a vehicle that has nothing to do with the immediate problem we have right now, which is the funding of the government, because we don't have a continuing resolution to actually fund the discretionary spending of the government. And that having expired, and our Democratic friends having voted down every attempt by the Republicans to fund the government, we're in this bind. So now we have a unanimous consent request, if I've got this right, that says if the Republicans agree to every demand the Democrats have made beforehand, initially, then and only then, our Democratic friends would like to have a conference on the budget. That's what I'm hearing. So what I would ask is whether the senator from Washington would consider a modification to the unanimous consent request. And that would be two things. One would be that they also would agree to go to conference on the CR so that we could work out the problem that is preventing us from reopening the government. That would be number one. And the other would be that when we go to conference...
Colleague, yield for a question? Just a clarification.
Sure.
Okay. Your request that we go to conference would be while the government is shut down. It doesn't matter in your request whether the government is shut down or not. Is that correct?
My request is that we try to find a resolution to the shutdown.
Right.
So go to conference.
While the government is shut down.
Go immediately. Right now, the government's shut down. Let's go right now to conference, as the House has requested, so that we can reopen the government.
Yeah.
So that we could work out an agreement so that we wouldn't, rather than this impasse. Let's try to break the impasse by going to conference. So that would be one condition. And then I would go back to what our concern has been about the budget conference all along. I have asked unanimous consent to go to conference on the budget. I'm a member of the Budget Committee. I would like us to do that. What I object to, and many of us have objected to, is that we use it as an opportunity to break the Senate rules and airdrop in a debt ceiling increase without the opportunity to have the 60-vote threshold we ought to have in the Senate if we're going to consider increasing the debt burden on the American people. So if the senator from Washington, so I guess I would ask unanimous consent that the senator from Washington would agree to those two modifications.
Does the senator so modify her request?
Mr. President, reserving the right to object, let me make it very clear. What the senator from Pennsylvania is asking is that we continue to hold the country and our communities and our families hostage while they try to get something out of a conference. And mainly he's talking about saying that Obamacare will be repealed unless we pass a very short-term, few-week continuing resolution, which is completely unacceptable not only to this senator but to the vast majority of Americans. Mr. President, and he is saying that we can talk while everyone is not at work, while the government is shut down. Well, you know, we have been asking to talk for a long time, but the American people deserve to be able to go to work, to get their paychecks, to have our communities and our country running without the threat of this over their head. So I object to the senator's request, and I repeat my request that we allow the House to vote on the bill that was sent over to them, that they have the votes on, open up the government, and then do as we have asked now 19 times to do what the American people expect us to do, which is to go to conference and work out our disagreements. And I renew my original request.
Is there objection to the request from the senator from Washington?
So, Mr. President, the senator from Washington objects to my request that we go to conference so that we can resolve the impasse of the shutdown government, and instead wishes to go to conference on something else, which is the budget resolution that does not reopen the government, and so I object.
Mr. President, let me make it clear. The senator from Washington does not believe that we should be negotiating in the dark of night. The government should be open and public, and people should be able to see what we're doing, and that is why our unanimous consent was so important. And I am so disappointed that the Republicans are saying, hold the country hostage, and that is the place we're left in.
Mr. President.
The senator from New York.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me just say this. I know my colleague from Pennsylvania is gone. Let's clarify a few things, because obfuscation is the rule of the day when you're not holding many cards. First, the senator from Pennsylvania said they have asked to open up the government. They have asked, rather, to go to conference 3 times and open up the government. Yeah, they have. If Obamacare is repealed, if Obamacare is delayed, and delayed for a year, and if the individual mandate is delayed for a year. That is not a request to go to conference. That is saying, unless I get my way on Obamacare, which has been voted on by these chambers, which has been litigated in the election, I'm going to shut the government down. So their position hasn't changed. And the bottom line is very simple. The bottom line now is, oh, let's go to conference all of a sudden. Sure. Let's go to conference while cancer treatments are being refused, and the more we delay, the worse that is. Let's go to conference while veterans' benefits can't be processed, and the more we delay, the more veterans are hurt. Let's go to conference before 800,000 people get their paychecks, which they need to feed their families. Let's go to conference while the Statue of Liberty is closed and my little sandwich shop nearby is not making any revenue. Please, please, I say to a colleague, what you want to do is use a bludgeon. Since a small group of Tea Party fanatics, as they are called, has Speaker Boehner in the palm of their hand, and they have the power not to fund the government. They say, until you fund the government, until you do what we want, we won't fund the government. So nothing has changed, and there is no concession or willingness to negotiate on a fair basis by the other side. No. Let me repeat to my colleague from Pennsylvania. You have it backwards. You are saying, let's negotiate, and then we might open up the government. The right way to do it is by the resolution offered by the chairwoman of the Budget Committee. Let's open up the government, and then we'll be happy to sit down and negotiate. That's the fundamental difference here. Well, whose side is the American people on? Ours, 70-22. Whose side are just every Democrat at each end of Pennsylvania Avenue on? Ours, of course. And if you look at the quotations in the House and Senate, a large number of those from the other side of the aisle are on our side, too. But because a small number of irresponsible members of the Tea Party have Speaker Boehner in their control right now, we can't succeed. So the Tea Party shutdown, the shutdown engineered, or the Tea Party originated, engineered, and put into place by the Tea Party with Senator Boehner, Speaker Boehner's fearful acquiescence, is still the law of the day. It will not be for much longer. The pressure from the public on the economy and the pressure, actually, from members on the other side of the aisle will increase. And I believe in a short while, the other side will have to say, okay, we'll fund the government, now let's sit down and talk, which is what Leader Reid and Chairwoman Murray have simply asked for today. It'll just take a few days more, but it'll happen. I wish that the other side had acquiesced now, because so many innocent millions are being held hostage and being hurt. I yield the floor.
The Assistant Majority Leader.
Mr. President, the unanimous consent request made by the senator from the state of Washington is eminently sensible. It basically says, why hold 800,000 federal employees hostage while we go about the negotiation of our future budget? The Majority Leader has made this offer. He has said that we are going to go forward, offer to Speaker Boehner the opportunity for us to open the government and then get into meaningful negotiations on all of the major issues. So what did we hear from the senator from Pennsylvania, Senator Toomey? His objection. He wants to continue to keep the government shut down while we are supposed to initiate negotiations. Who pays the price for that? Well, it wouldn't be any senator. The people who pay a price for it are those 800,000 furloughed employees and all of the people in America who count on their services every single day. I've said it before, bears repeating. 200 people were turned away from the National Institutes of Health this week who wanted to enter clinical trials because of a serious life-threatening illness, including 30 children, cancer patients, coming to the NIH with their parents for one last hopeful move to save their lives. So the senator from Pennsylvania says, sorry, we can't take care of those children. We can't take care of those seriously ill Americans. We've got to sit down and negotiate. Well, it's easy for him, and perhaps easy for others, to say it's all about us, but it isn't. It's all about America. It's all about the people we were sent here to represent. It's all about the reputation of this nation. What it will take to get beyond this current crisis is very obvious. We have unity on the Democratic side to open the government. We've sent a continuing resolution to the House to do the same. What has to happen now, moderate Republicans have got to step forward. It is interesting to me in the last 48 hours how few have come to the floor, how few have come to the Senate floor to talk about this issue. Privately, they tell me that they're torn and worried over what this is doing to our country and what it's doing to their party. But some moderate Republicans in the House of Representatives have spoken out. I'd like to, if I can at this point, recount those that have spoken out. Representative Pat Meehan, Republican of Pennsylvania, said, quote, "At this point, I believe it's time for the House to vote for a clean, short-term funding bill to bring the Senate to the table and negotiate a responsible compromise." End of quote. A clean, short-term funding bill? That's already passed the Senate. It's sitting in the House, waiting for the Speaker to call it. Representative Mike Fitzpatrick, another Republican from Pennsylvania. A Fitzpatrick aide tells the Philadelphia Inquirer the congressman would support a clean funding bill if it came up for a vote. Representative Lou Barletta, Republican of Pennsylvania. Barletta said he would absolutely vote for a clean bill in order to avert a shutdown of the government. Representative Charlie Dent, Republican of Pennsylvania. "I'm prepared to vote for a clean, continuing resolution," he told the Huffington Post. In addition to that, Representative Jim Gerlach, another Republican from Pennsylvania. The congressman issued a statement saying he would vote in favor of a so-called clean budget bill. The list goes on. The list includes those names that I've mentioned: Representative Pat Meehan, Representative Scott Rigell, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, Republican of Virginia, Representative John Runyon, Republican of New Jersey, Representative Mike Fitzpatrick, Republican of Pennsylvania, Representative Lou Barletta, Republican of Pennsylvania, Representative Peter King, Republican of New York, Representative Devin Nunes, Republican of California, Representative Charlie Dent, Republican of Pennsylvania, Representative Frank Wolf, Republican of Virginia, Representative Michael Grimm, Republican of New York, Representative Eric Paulson, Republican of Minnesota, Representative Rob Whitman, Republican of Virginia, Representative Frank Loviando, Republican of New Jersey, Representative Randy Forbes, Republican of Virginia, Representative Jim Gerlach, Republican of Pennsylvania, and Representative Leonard Lance, Republican of New Jersey, Representative Mike Simpson, Republican of Idaho. 17. Why is that significant? It takes only 2 or 3 more Republican congressmen to step up and say they will vote for the CR that we sent over from the Senate to reopen the government of the United States of America. There are 6 Republican congressmen in my state of Illinois. I challenge all of them. Join this group of your fellow colleagues and the Democrats in the House who don't want to punish America and 800,000 federal workers. What's at stake here? It isn't just bragging rights about how this crisis ends. What's at stake is much more. It even goes beyond the life and death situation faced by hundreds at the National Institutes of Health. I'm still stunned by what I was told yesterday by Senator Feinstein. It's public knowledge. She announced it on the floor. 72% of the civilian workforce in America's intelligence agencies have been furloughed. What do? Well, I'll tell you what they do. They listen closely to places and people all around the world to try to see a threat coming against the United States. They are sent to work each day with the most serious mission of almost anyone working for our government. They're sent there with the mission to avoid the next 9/11, to spare innocent people across America the possibility of a terrorist attack. I'm not over-dramatizing it. That's what the intelligence agencies are all about every day. Today, almost 3 out of 4 of the professional men and women in the civilian side of intelligence are home. They're not listening. They're not watching. They've been sent home by this Tea Party Republican shutdown. It'll only take about 3 more Republican congressmen to step forward and say this has to come to an end for the good of our nation, for the safety of our nation, and for the future of our economy. That's what we're up against. What we're trying to do is to get the conversation underway to resolve some major issues. I hope we're successful. But in the meantime, let's protect America. Let's serve the people that sent us here. Let's reopen this government as quickly as possible. It's gone on now for a day and a half. It should end this afternoon. Speaker John Boehner has it within his power to end this government shutdown in a matter of minutes. Minutes. And then we can start the conversation about the important issues facing us. I think the President's right. We've got to do this in a responsible manner to say once and for all, we're not going to hold the American people, the American taxpayers, or America's security hostage to political temper tantrum. We have to face our responsibility honestly and directly. Mr. President, may I yield the floor.
Mr. President. Senator from Virginia.